Morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Is Mark going to sit down? Or is he going to think eventually?
It's interesting that the only item on the agenda for knowledge management for the 3 days is this one. And I'm really interested to get your sense of where knowledge management fits in the innovative AI technology world that we now inhabit in law firms. I've got lots of experience as a head of knowledge management at HSF and other law firms. And I've got Johannes and Robin with me today to give you a sense of the new world, possibly, of knowledge management and how technology can help. Knowledge management historically, I think, has been know-how, precedence, training, possibly, and I think this needs to change. I've often said that knowledge management is really just good business management in a law firm that's selling knowledge. But I think it needs to change because, and the two experts today will show their technology is trying to address the wealth of information and knowledge that we need to keep up to date with. And I don't know how law firms, you may be able to tell me, how many law firms keep their precedent databases up to date? How many law firms keep their expert profiles up to date? How can we do this? How can the technology help to enable some of the content and the know-how and the insight that people need to do their job, lawyers need to do their job? How can we get that to them quickly as part of their world? So we're going to talk today about improving knowledge management through advanced legal search and innovative research. So they're going to talk about search and research. I think, interestingly, from what Emily has just been talking about, the fundamental element of a lot of AI is search. Finding things. It may not be extracting things, it may not be sorting them or using machine learning, but it's initially, at least for due diligence, as we've just seen with Luminance and Kira and other AI technologies, it's finding something in a document. It's digitizing that document first so that you can search it, and then finding it, and then doing something with it. And that, Emily has been saying, is the lawyer who still needs to do something with it, and I think that's still very, very fundamental. But we need to think about how search can be enhanced search. I think search needs to take that next step to be, I think what Johannes is talking about is actionable insight. So doing something with it. Is that helping somebody draft a document? Is it helping somebody analyze a trend? Is it annotating the document or annotating the know-how? Or is it just connecting people with know-how and people know-how with people? Who's the expert? So for the next sort of 40 minutes or 30 minutes, we're going to, each of them are going to give you a 5-minute presentation about their particular technology. I'm going to ask some questions that hopefully will illuminate their technology a little bit more, and then there will be some time for you to ask questions of them or of me. So I'm going to hand over to Johannes Stiehler, who is the CTO of ayfie, for 5 minutes.
It's great.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm just going to read quickly about 2 use cases that we solve with our technology. That should give you sort of a little bit of a background of what we're going to talk about from my perspective. And as was mentioned, it's all about knowledge management. It's about getting access to your knowledge. And if you're like any of our clients, you'll be spending most of your time doing 2 things, essentially. One is kind of researching a problem, so getting the knowledge in place for a specific matter. And the second is preparing actual advice for a client. And that is kind of the 2 sides to that coin, is consuming information, then producing new information. That is hopefully an improvement upon what was there before. And our technology is basically built to help you go through that process in a quicker and more efficient way. So the first use case that we're dealing with and that we're implementing in our technology is how can I surface internal insights and fast? And that seems like a very simple question, seems like an obvious thing, but it's still surprisingly difficult because your internal insights might reside in emails and documents and different repositories. They might be spread across the organization. And it's very hard to just get all of that into one place and into one accessible tool, which is why we talk a lot about knowledge discovery as opposed to knowledge management, which is just about finding where your stuff is, as opposed to actually putting it neatly on the shelf, so you can reference it later. So, and that doesn't only relate to curated knowledge. When we talk about knowledge management, we often mean curated knowledge, which means a template somebody prepared, a best practice document, a process that is in place. But it's just as much or more knowledge is hidden in the implementation of those templates, in the implementation of those processes, in documents somebody actually wrote, in emails somebody actually sent. So our software tries to help you deal with that fact and access both the templates, both the precedents, and also a lot of kind of informal conversation about matters that might actually relate to what you're currently researching. And in order to do that, it basically needs to do the job of a person who kind of tries to file things into a neat shelf by pulling everything together from all the disparate sources that you have, Google Drive, Dropbox, if you use that, Exchange Server, eDocs, some other document management system, making it accessible, and then, as Mark said, linking documents, connecting the dots, finding the relations, finding the commonalities, so that when you actually research a topic, you not only find results as in a kind of a classic search, and we do provide that Google-like search interface, but the results also help you go further and find related documents, find additional information about something, find background information, find a template, both a template and an actual contract that was written based on it, so you can find some way deeper knowledge about a specific problem. And if that doesn't help, if the expertise is not reflected in the documents in the way that you need, then the tool will also help you find the expert who's actually able to help you with a specific topic. And finding an expert, I mean, a lot of large companies trying to maintain an expert database. That is very, very hard. And it's a sad fact that the person actually mentioned in that database, they might be the one who kind of update their profile the most. They might not necessarily be the one most knowledgeable about a topic. So we're kind of going back from the documents that you're looking at, from the matters that you're investigating in our tool, to the people who actually interacted with those problems the most. So the search helps you not only find documents, not only find information, but also find people who interacted with that information in a meaningful way. That might be by means of an email conversation that went back and forth between several people. It might be in the way of somebody actually writing a document about a topic you're currently researching. And then you can use our software to go back to that person and say, okay, this helps me already, but I need some more expertise, and can we discuss this? So it's both connecting documents in-house that you have with each other through common properties, but it's also connecting you when you do research to people who might actually be able to help you out and get your work done in a more efficient and also more kind of pleasurable way without the repetitive task of kind of sifting through a knowledge management system. Should be under 5 minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Robin. I'm head of product at Justice. Justice is a legal research software company, so our background is in providing access to legal authorities, that's case law and legislation, primary authorities. And Justice has been doing that for a very long time, I think actually since 1986, Justice has been doing that. And we actually have now what would be probably the largest collection of common law and legislation that's available anywhere online. You know, we've got Australia and Canada and UK and Ireland and the Caribbean and all sorts of countries. And Justice was recently acquired by VLEX, which expanded these collections enormously to South America and Europe and the United States. So we've kind of been in the content gathering business for a very, very long time. And so we've been in the content gathering business for a very long time, and then up until recently we were what you might call a document delivery service. So you come on to Justice and you search for what you're looking for, and we present a document, and usually if you print it off and read it, that's kind of what services like Justice used to be for a decade or so, for the past decade. But in the past few years we decided that we wanted to do something totally different. we wanted to take all of this material that we have, that we've been gathering for such a long time, and treat this as kind of the raw material of the law. This is sort of the letter of the law, this primary content. And then we wanted to build an intelligent layer on top of that and build tools that actually help you do legal research, so help you navigate this enormous information space. So we started doing various machine learning exercises and technologies and concept extraction, and we were building search engines, and we started building this suite of core capabilities to extract knowledge from legal content. And what came out the other side, and what we have now, is something that we call the Justice Legal Graph. So we've been extracting judges and organizations and citations and all of these things that were in this content and building them into this very, very structured database. It's got, at the moment, 1.3 million cases, soon to have about 40 million cases once we increase that to the US content. Statutes and courts and subject terms, and a key part of the Justice Legal Graph is the Justice Legal Taxonomy, this is something that we spent the past 5 years building. It was a combination of our engineers and our legal editors. The Justice Legal Taxonomy it's about 1.5 million legal terms. It starts at like 46 top-level categories, and it goes 9 levels deep, and it's probably the largest and most comprehensive classification taxonomy for the law that's ever been produced. And one of the really, really key things is that we are now able to consistently classify 1.3 million cases against this taxonomy, which is something that I don't think has ever been done before. Now, I talked about these core capabilities that we've been working on, the search and indexing, the classification, reference recognition, concept extraction, all of these things that we spent working on our data, so working on the case law, working on the legislation. But then we realized that these core capabilities can be enormously useful for you and your data. We've been working on case law and legislation for such a long time, but these tools can do hugely useful things for your data. So we're providing sets of APIs and other integrations and things for law firms and end users to use our tools on their data and connect it to the Justice Legal Graph to create what I'm calling the hybrid legal graph. So this is about using, where your data meets our data, then we can apply a lot more knowledge to what you have and integrate what the precedents and the know-how that you have with the primary authority content, which we've had for a very long time. Is that 5?
Brilliant, Robin, thank you. Strikes me is that there's a common theme, that there's a theme of too much information, too much unstructured data, and these people and others are structuring it for us and enabling us to find things and to utilize them much more quickly. At HSF, we've been piloting an iManage Raven Insight instance, which is very similar to ayfie, where we've combined the document management system content with the practice management client and metadata and credentials and profiles online to create an enterprise search, but also a know-who in many ways. And that's enormously powerful. It's connecting things that people didn't know were there. I think that's a key thing. It's not only just doing things that you have done in the past more quickly, it's actually making some tacit connections very explicit. It's making the connection that the real person who's got some expertise in a particular sector or a particular practice is actually doing the work. That may have remained hidden, and we're actually opening that up to be an actionable insight that you can move on. Taking the content out of documents and finding trends and themes and market practice is something that it has often been a manual task. So to have some of these tools, which are increasingly available and increasingly accessible and usable very quickly, I think will make an enormous difference to knowledge management. And I think, as I started from, knowledge management will change and need to respond to that. Let me ask some direct questions, which we have had notice of. So, can you each of you please give me an example of use of your particular technology in a particular use case, in a live use of the product, that can show this nature of its enhanced search. It's not just a search or a research, it's got some added value. Robin, can you?
So we provide, access to case law judgments, and judges are not known for their brevity. It's quite common for a judgment to be, say, 10,000 words long. And if you had to read that, or read many of those judgments, it's going to take you a really, really, really long time. But one of the features that we produced in our recent platform, Justice One, is something that we call key passages, it's a very simple concept. It's simply mining all of the data to find out which passages in a case actually get used most often. And when we started doing that, you start to see some really interesting things, like how this 10,000 word judgment has actually sort of over time been distilled down to it's actually only that sentence that anyone ever talks about anymore. So that's a really interesting use case where all of that information was already in the data itself. Nobody had to do anything. No one had to summarize this stuff. It was just there. These cases have been citing each other for decades, hundreds of years. And what's interesting is that also changes over time. So when a case gets reported by a law reporter, they have a summary of what the case is about, what was held and things like that. But that's very much then sort of stamped on the judgment at the time that it happened. What we found with this key passages feature is that it changes. As new cases come along and they cite other ones, those older ones actually come to be recognized as authorities in different ways, because obviously in judgments they talk about all kinds of different things, and many, many different points. So a case that was originally about tax, that's what the bulk of the head note is about, was something to do with tax, actually came to be about parliamentary privilege or Hansard and access to parliamentary discussions. And this is something that we were able to uncover in the data automatically, like without a person having to look at that. So it's almost like a retrospective head note on how the cases come to be applied.
Interesting. So it's live data in many ways. It's not. It's no
living,
longer
yeah.
the report on the wall.
Yeah.
Super. Johannes.
Right. So maybe the best example is a project we have with a large law firm in Norway at this point. And the purpose of that project is to bridge a gap that I believe exists in many law firms, which is the gap between the knowledge base and the managed knowledge, the curated knowledge, and the actual live work that people are doing. So the situation there is that there is a curated knowledge base that has categories. It's very nicely filed in SharePoint. It's all prepared to be used, templates, processes, best practices. But then there's a huge body of work that lies somewhere, I think, at this point in I Manage Worksite, that is not categorized. It's not kind of related to that knowledge base at all, but it contains the more recent information, obviously, because it's the live data that people produce, the documents they write. And there's basically two challenges with that. One is that people will rarely go back to the knowledge base to find out how to do something. They will rather go into the kind of a live document store because that's what they work with more. And that data is pretty much unstructured. And the second challenge is that the more senior the lawyers are in that company, the less they even go there, the more they just look at their own stuff. Think, okay, did I do something like that 5-10 years ago? Well, maybe, so I'll use that. Which, of course, is neither the most recent nor the most relevant knowledge to use in that case. So we used the technology to bridge both these gaps by, first of all, taking the knowledge base and using it as training material for automated classifiers to classify everything else into the same categories. So when you do a search and you say, okay, what do you have in terms of this topic, you get the knowledge base articles obviously ranked relatively high because they're kind of the canonical knowledge. But you also get all the live data that relates to that and overlaps with that and connects with that in many different ways. And the second problem with the kind of the island, the personal knowledge island that people like to create, we solved by creating a component that when you look at a document in your own store, surfaces all the most recent stuff from all over the company that actually is similar to that. So without you even searching and accessing the tool expressively or intentionally, it kind of plays or goes inside the company knowledge base and brings in all the knowledge that relates to your own prior work that you're currently reviewing, thereby increasing the chance that even a senior lawyer will be able to access the most recent knowledge, because he will never open that search tool, right?
Just struck me, Johannes, when you were talking like that. It's very, very similar to the sort of work that we've been doing. Do you get any sense that there is a tension between that access to all of that content and the security requirement to keep confidential particular matters and particular practice, or have a sort of pessimistic security where every matter is closed?
There is a tension, of course, and it's always a large part of any of these projects to figure out what the permission levels should be. So by default, the software just replicates the permission level that people have to the actual content. So if you have access to a document in Worksite, you can see it in our tool. That sometimes is too much and sometimes it's not enough. So we try and figure out what part of this content can actually go into the, let's say, broader knowledge base, the non-curated knowledge base, and what content needs to be sealed off. And in this particular case, I think the balance that we achieved was maintaining all the access privileges as they were in the source systems, which were pretty open, but then excluding current cases from certain features of the tool, so that you would kind of restrict most deep research tasks to actual closed matters from the past.
Right. Interesting.
That seemed like a balance that worked for that particular company.
Super. So next question. I'm really interested in how we can show some form of profitability or return on investment. So I'm curious to know if you have any metrics or any examples of some return on investment for each of your tools. Robin.
Well, something about legal research is it's kind of the red-headed stepchild in the legal industry. It doesn't legal research software doesn't really get a lot of I was going to say respect, but I think what I mean is that people don't really recognize legal research as an area in which you could make savings. It's just kind of a necessary evil. So nobody actually wants to do legal research, and nobody wants to pay for legal research either. So if you ever ask a lawyer, do you do legal research? How often do you do legal research? The answer will be, not if I can help it, or as little as possible.
And it ends up to do it. Yeah.
And because of that, it's usually delegated to sort of more junior members of staff. That could be newly qualified or trainees. Go away and do this research for me. But just because you're getting someone cheaper to do it doesn't mean that it's cheap. You're still talking about qualified lawyers' time, and it's a really, really time-consuming activity. So we did a business case study with a sort of medium to large law firm in the west of England, where we just looked at who they were getting to do their legal research, the amount of time that they were spending doing it, and adding up the time and how much it cost. And we found, and they were really surprised to realize that they were spending, it was probably about £1 million a year on legal research for the salary bill alone, which is not a small amount of money, but it's especially not a small amount of money for something that nobody wants to pay for. Yeah. It's becoming increasingly hard to bill for legal research time for no other reason that people don't want to. What do you mean? You spent time looking up the law. You're the lawyer. You're meant to know what it is. People don't want to pay for it. So almost any return on that is a really good thing. An interesting thing about legal research software, which is where we've gone, from a content provider to a technology provider, is it's in this kind of weird space in between for who's responsible for procuring this software. Traditionally, in the knowledge management side of things, where it might be knowledge professionals or librarians, the main concern was, do I have my content bases covered? Do I have this series of law reports, access to this legislation? All of those things that my lawyers are going to need. That, I would say, was probably the number one priority. If we were talking about software that was more sort of, say, workflow software, collaboration software, or even something closer to the client service delivery end of the spectrum, you probably would have had a business services team or business analysts looking at the viability and the return that you were going to get. So it's sort of lost a little bit in who owns this problem. Yeah. If you're providing intelligent legal research software to save time, who is now looking at the costs, the benefits that can bring to the firm. Whose job is that?
Might be one of those instances where the knowledge management function or the knowledge centre or the information manager needs to evolve to respond to that and to procure in a different way. Yeah, interesting. Johannes.
Right. So, I mean, it's relatively easy to figure out ROIs on very specific use cases that you try and solve with the software. It's very hard to find a general number on that. And that is mainly because people are not that keen on measuring their processes to a granularity where you could actually tell or quantify the savings in a way that that you could call actually a basis for an ROI. And for specific use cases, it's relatively easy. If you think about a data subject access request and how long that takes you to fulfill over time, and how quick a software such as ours can make that process, then it becomes obvious. If you're thinking about legal research, as you mentioned, I mean, it's much more undefined how much time you actually spend on that and how much time you spend on not finding stuff, because that's the time you want to measure. Of course, I can measure your overall time you spend on doing research today, and then I measure the overall time after the introduction of the tool, and then hopefully you will see a reduction, but you might just as well see an increase because your business just increased. So you would have to measure that on a case-by-case level, on specific process steps, in order to really be able to tell that in a good way. So that's sometimes the hard part of figuring that out. So when we talk about ROI, we try and limit that discussion to very specific processes and very specific workflows where it becomes very apparent. And then it's as simple as saying, well, it's not going to make everything else slower. That's for sure. Yeah. So just focus on those, like these are like doing specific legal research, like just opening a document. If you think about opening a document inside a knowledge discovery tool such as ours versus going into SharePoint, doing all the kind of login dance and kind of going to that folder level, you already get an ROI right there.
Interesting. So there are two elements there. One was the sort of very defined use case, which was a data access request. Yep. So an employee or ex-employee who says, I'd like to receive all of the data you hold about me, and your tool would search the whole universe within the firm to find that. And that is increasingly prevalent. It's also very time consuming for lots of people, usually within HR, to go and find those things, and in IT. So interesting. So that's one use. The other was to actually change the process, or to actually map the current process to see what the difference might be in the way that you change it. Yeah, so we were doing, as part of our pilot, lots of different tasks, research tasks. I need to go find a precedent, I need to go find an example, I need to go and find something or somebody, and seeing how long it took in our current SharePoint system and how long it might take with an enterprise search tool. Interesting, so you can see a before and after and get some return. Last question. Last planned question. I've got a couple of others that might surprise you with, if that's all right. Do you think that your tools are going to change the way that legal services are delivered? No longer is it a resource possibly that just sits there waiting reactively for a lawyer to use it. Do you think either of your tools will change fundamentally the way a law firm or a law company delivers its services to customers, I think you'd like to call it, Daniel, rather than clients?
Well, I certainly hope so. In the past, Justice was very much what we call a destination website. You kind of have to go there to use it, yeah. And before you can go there to use it, you have to know that it's available to you to use, and that's a problem that we've seen across many law firms. Is the lawyers don't know what they have access to. They often don't know what's available to them, and despite knowledge managers' best efforts to convey this to them, they don't listen. So they don't know that they have access to this service, and this service to get all of these different things. And so if they don't know they have it, they're never going to go and use it, and they're never going to discover how useful it might be for them. So what I was talking about in my intro about how these sort of core capabilities that we've used on our data, how we wanted to use that on your data, the idea is that we can surface these in many new contexts, and there's a whole array of places in which you might do that. It could be, Word plugins, browser plugins, sort of integration servers with all of your content integrations with your content management system or your knowledge management system. It could be, external APIs or data as a service, and all of these things.
What does that mean in reality? Does that mean that when I'm actually in a Word document, or I'm browsing, or I'm looking for something,
yes, so
the Justice content will be fed into that without me realizing it?
Yes, so if you're drafting a document and you need access to some legal information, or you want related authorities, or maybe you're reading opposing counsel's skeleton arguments, something like that. A Word plugin brings all of that stuff directly into the document. So you didn't even need to know that. You don't actually care whether it's coming from Justice or anywhere else. Or you don't care whether it's coming from our database or from your own internal databases. This is knowledge. This is all knowledge. That helps with the job. Yes, bringing it into Word, bringing it into whatever environment that you're working in without you having to go looking for it is something.
So it could tell me that opposing counsel's citations are out of date, or they've been overruled.
Opposing counsel's citations are
some
out
other
of
case
date.
that I should quote in opposition.
Yeah, scan the document, find all of the authorities immediately, and tell you which ones are possibly have been treated negatively, which ones are have been treated recently. All of that stuff. Without having to go away and search for this one, look that up, bringing that stuff immediately. And it's the hybrid of those citations with what we can already tell the document is about, means that we can start presenting useful information right where you are.
Yeah.
But something else I would mention is that there is an array of ways in which we can do this. We're only starting to do that, and we are not going to, we don't want to produce an end product and say, that's it. We want to collaborate with law firms and knowledge professionals and the end users to figure out what's going to be useful for them, because actually people have totally different requirements. So we're not interested in producing one off-the-shelf product and say, that's what it does. I hope it works for you. We think it will. That's not really what we want to do. So we're at the moment in ongoing discussions with a whole range of big law firms and smaller law firms to see what would work for them, to see what their data looks like and what we can provide to them. Something else that we don't want to do is work in a space where we're not the experts. We are primary authority experts. That's what we want to do. And people who provide sort of secondary content or do other things, we want to work with them and say, that's not Justice's area of expertise. You do that, and we do this bit, and hopefully we can make it work together.
Cool. Johannes, are you going to change the legal service delivery model?
Of course we do. No, I mean, there's two steps I see happening. One is, obviously the goal is to produce something, right? The eventual outcome is some product that you deliver to your customers, as I learned just now. And you hopefully have a defined process how to get there. And the more interaction points in that process you can support with technology, obviously the more exhaustive and what I consider very important, the more consistent the outcome is going to be. I think it's important to get consistent outcome irrespective of who does the actual work, under what circumstances is the work done, and what other factors come into it. So that's the first step. The second step is going to be the more interaction points you have in your process with the software, you will then think about changing the process to be more efficient, to be more less repetitive, maybe even less human-centered. I mean, expertise is always the key value in this process, but technology can certainly help offload the people who execute it from tasks that they don't need to be doing.
Yes. I'm conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left.
That's why I stopped talking.
No, it's all right. That's great. Really fascinating. Can I ask if there are any questions from the floor? We do have some mics, I think, roaming around if you want to ask some questions.
Hi, it's Vicky Abberton at From Counsel. It was just a quick question about countering what's possibly a slightly older culture within law firms now, or culture and slightly more senior people, where some people can be a bit hoarding of information. There's quite a kind of, this is my info, this is my expertise, this is my route to my remuneration, and how you counter that culture in a lot of the legal tech, which requires everything to be pulled together.
I think that's
that's promo for me. So technology can change culture to a certain extent, of course, but I think we should not kid ourselves. It will not change it fundamentally from day one. So the problem will remain. You have to basically have a parallel effort to change that attitude, as well as bringing in technology to make that knowledge silo or that island available to everybody else. Sometimes that happens automatically if people are just very protective of their knowledge, but they still put it in the document management system or the surface, and suddenly everybody else will be super surprised as to what's there. But sometimes it goes so far that people actually have that knowledge on their kind of internal hard drives or on USB stick and don't even put it into accessible sources, and then you really have to have a parallel effort to counteract that attitude, pretty much. Technology will not be able to offload you of that task, unfortunately.
I think from the experience that I've had with an enterprise search engine, it often finds things that people are not supposed to find, they're not supposed to see, and it shocks people, and you then have a step back, thinking, well, we can't roll this out because it's actually going to reveal things. I think that's almost part of the testing and the piloting and the reality of the culture of the organisation before you go live with something. I think the two need to go very closely together. I think it's an interesting one. I don't know, from my own experience in sort of larger law firms, I don't think there's a lot of people who are hiding things in their bottom drawer and not sharing at all. A lot of them are having to put the document onto the document management system, and that is probably the live repository of good know-how and content. And I think being able to access that, and as long as it's securely and not breaking any confidentiality, I think getting access to the document management system is probably key.
I think also if people are being protective of their own knowledge, because this is, as you say, their route to their remuneration, that's not beneficial to the business. That doesn't help. That doesn't help the business go forward. So the technology can't change the culture, but we should all be working to try and make sure that kind of practice doesn't go on too much.
Time out. I was going to ask one more difficult question. Has anybody else got any other questions? No, let's go time out. Robin, Johannes, thank you both very much. Very kind.
Thank you.
Cheers. Great stuff.
So Johannes, I think you get to speak to us for a further 15 minutes now.
Exactly. I'm just going to stay here.
So if you can unpack whatever you want to unpack, I leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so you have to bear with me for another 15 minutes. So I'm trying to be quick and entertaining. Talking about something completely different now. We're no longer talking about knowledge discovery. We're not talking about external knowledge sources. I actually want to take this opportunity to take a step back and look at the broader picture of AI and technology and why we're actually bothering to sit here and listen to this stuff, or why we are bothering to implement it. And maybe even give you some hints as to how to go about judging what technology does for you at this point and what it can do for you in the future. I know with all of these conferences, when you talk about future technology or advanced technology or AI, there's always this one talk about, will a robot take my job? Or when will the robot take my job? The more pessimistic variant of that. So this is not it. That's not that talk. This is about why should we bother with robots at all? And if you think about it, a lot of people immediately jump to cost savings, and that's of course true. You want to save cost. But I think in general, when you deal with experts, when you deal with humans who do very difficult work, there's actually a resource that is, I believe, more valuable than money. And that has to do with this little fellow. That's a goldfish, apparently. So what we share with that goldfish is the average attention span. A human, just as a fish, has an attention span of 8 to 10 seconds, which is involuntary attention, so something grabs my attention, and then after 10 seconds I move on to the next thing. So I'm obviously on a budget, but it's not a money budget, it's an attention budget. And I extend that by exercising willpower and turning attention into concentration. And that's actually the difference between those two things. So I direct my concentration to a task, but even that concentration will wear out after, I don't know, for a young kid today, it's probably 3.5 minutes. For most of us, it's going to be 35. So we are on a very tight budget that is in some respects tighter than the money budget. And I believe that this attention budget, this concentration budget that we all have to deal with is actually the reason why we want to bother with technology, why we want to bother with software. If you think about self-driving cars, I don't believe anyone is actually well, some people might, but very few people are longing for the advent of the self-driving car in order to get rid of those beautiful mountain drives on curvy roads, right? You still want to do those, potentially. What you want to get rid of is your super boring commute. You don't want to spend 2 hours driving between two white lines when that's just highly repetitive and uninteresting. You don't want to spend your concentration budget, the small budget that you have during that day to exercise willpower onto a given task, on just getting to work and just getting that done. And that is really the reason, I believe, why we're so fond of technology, is that we feel that this tight budget that we have can be spent more effectively, can be spent at the right time, and can be spent in the right way, on the right tasks. And I really urge you, if you kind of stop listening now and go get a coffee, just take away that the attention budget is really what we want to be thinking about when dealing with technology. And I'm now going to talk about 3 different levels of dealing with that attention budget or that concentration budget with software, 2 of which have nothing to do with AI, 1 of which doesn't even have anything to do with robots, so I'm kind of cheating on the title a little bit. But there's several ways that technology can help us focus, direct, and budget that attention when we're working with our day-to-day tasks. The first level that people tend to underestimate and often forget is workflow and UI. So user experience, the user interface of a tool, it's not about beauty, it's not about hipness, it's not about, well, fun in a certain way. It's about directing attention to the right things at the right time and spending as little concentration on grasping some concepts as you possibly can. And I always get very scared when I see people in companies or in government organizations that actually do important things, work with tools that look like they kind of dropped out from the 90s. Because you need workflow and UI to help direct your attention to what's important. And I actually have an example of that from our own software. So it's a negative example. People will probably hate me for showing that. So this is a list of people. When you think about an e-discovery process, you look at a lot of millions of documents, emails, and so on. And our software gives you a way, just as a side note, gives you a way to kind of aggregate that and understand, okay, these are the people that are interacting, these are locations, organizations, key terms. This is PRI that hovers around that document set. And that's one visualization that we offer to do that. And it's basically just a list of people's names, and it's a frequency on the right-hand side. So there's 102 documents mentioning Ron Washington, whoever that is. And there's pretty much an order to that depending on the prominence in the document set based on frequency. And that requires a lot of concentration. You have to direct your attention to that. You have to read into it to draw conclusions and understand what it's actually telling you. And at the same time, it punishes you by not telling you all that much. It just tells you like 5 items on top and 5 items on bottom, and then you have to show more or interact with it in some other way. If what you're interested in is who is actually doing what to whom in this document set, this is actually much better. Because this actually grabs your attention right away. I'm pretty sure everybody who didn't watch the screen before now watches it because it looks funky. It conveys the same information. Nobody cares about the absolute numbers. Who cares that it's 102 Barack Obamas or 591 Washingtons? What you're interested in is the relative size of these people in that document collection. So who's talking to whom about what, with what frequency? You can totally grasp that. So it's more interesting, it's more captivating, it conveys more information at the same time. It allows you to go deeper into this kind of smaller areas of this picture, and it gives you some kind of some affordances that invite you to play with the data. It gives you a slider that helps you kind of scroll back and forth through time, like a time machine. How did conversations change over time in that document set? And it invites you to interact with the data visualization, which means it actually grabs your attention, so you don't have to put effort into focusing on it, which is great. So that's workflow and UI, first level of attention budgeting. The second level is what we call simple automation, or some tools are called robotic process automation. It's pretty much in the same area. But what I mean by simple automation, this is software that just does repetitive tasks that require no intelligence. And it's super sad to see how often humans are actually still doing those tasks. They should not. That's not what we want to put our attention budget into. So this is again a tool from my company. It analyzes, on the right-hand side, it analyzes loan applications in the US. So you have this 800-page monster that you throw into the software, and it will then tell you, okay, these are the 20 document types that I found here. These are the actual most recent versions of each of those document types, and it will later help you process those documents. Very nice thing. But what I found is that people still, when they use that software, they often do this. They go to SharePoint, download a loan application, upload the loan application, and then let the tool do its job. And if you do that once, that's fine. If you do it as they do, 340,000 times over time, it's not fine. It's stupid. It's a repetitive task that you should not direct your attention to. And don't forget about these pieces of software that can help you do that. There's software there for doing that, which will basically take that task away. So that's simple automation. And I love simple automation, although we're an AI company, because it's binary. It either works or not. So that it downloads stuff, it uploads stuff. If it's broken, it doesn't. If it's not broken, it does a perfect job pretty much all the time. So there's no uncertainty with this. It's automating a repetitive task that you do day to day, and the outcome is predictable, right? If you go back to work tomorrow or on Monday, just watch yourself how often you do these sorts of things. Downloading, uploading, moving files left and right. It's not where you want to put your attention budget. And the third level, that's now intelligent automation. It's AI. And that's AI having intelligence in the name sounds grand and sounds lovely, but the problem with intelligence is that it has opinions. Every intelligence kind of also means that you're bringing an uncertainty factor into it. An AI will have opinions just as a coworker that you bring into a process. It has certain biases because it's been trained, no matter if you trained it or if it comes pre-trained, and it has certain properties that mean it's good at some jobs and bad at others. So intelligent automation means that you're now, again, an example from that application I showed before, you now go into this residential loan application and you have the software figure out what it's about. You have software analyze, okay, this part is actually the borrower's name, this part is the property address, this part is the interest rate, whatever, and then put that into a representation that can be consumed by other software tools, or put it into visual representation that can be consumed by a human. This is AI to my definition because it exercises judgment. It has opinions, right? So it identifies a borrower's name, and now the outcome is no longer binary. It's not identifying a borrower or not identifying a borrower. The outcome is actually opinionated, which means the borrower's name might be identified but wrong. It might be incomplete. It might be misspelled. It might be misextracted. It might be the OCR has gone wrong. It might actually extract the application ID as the borrower's name or something like that. Of course, this being our software, we'll never do that, I'm sure. But there's a possibility, right? Now we have software that actually exercises judgment on your documents. So you have to be aware of that. And I think what we love about AI is that it gives us a much broader level, or much higher level, much broader way to optimize our attention budget. It can now do much more than what simple automation can do. It can offload us of even more repetitive and boring and menial tasks. It will never offload us of everything. So no robot will ever take your job. but it will help us kind of go back to what is actually important. It will help us spend that limited amount of attention that we have on the tasks that are actually relevant to the success of the project. And it will put, for instance, if you think about e-discovery, it's simple as putting those 20 documents that actually are important in the first slots of the review queue, so that people actually review those documents when they come in the morning and are still fresh and are less likely to overlook things. So that's where AI can really excel and help us optimize that attention budget if we manage to treat it as a coworker. It has opinions, it has bad days, depending on whatever factors might play into it, and it has a margin of error that we have to deal with. So it needs to be embedded in a process that is still governed by humans, and that process should be big enough that you catch all the errors, but small enough that you actually optimize your attention budget. And that's one of the things you should take away from this. You should treat it like a coworker in all aspects. You should interview it. So before bringing in an AI, find out what its opinions are, how it's usually dealing with stuff. It will annoy you eventually, that is for sure, with some bad habits. And if it continuously doesn't perform, you should fire it. Simple as that. There shouldn't be a reason to kind of try and make a software work for years if it just doesn't function for the problem that you're trying to solve. Don't bring in the technology first and then find the problem later. Try and find the problem in your process that you want to solve with technology. So 3 takeaways from this. Remember the goal, optimize attention. That's the goal of all software, I believe. Beyond optimizing cost, it's that much more valuable resource of human concentration that we can exercise, and that's very, very limited. Don't underestimate the lower levels, which means don't underestimate the impact of UX, don't underestimate the possibility to automate a lot of stupid things that you do every day. There's tools for that on a personal level, there's tools for that on a corporate level, and treat AI like a colleague, interview it, let it work, control what it's doing, and fire it if it doesn't perform. Thank you.